Hi, Becky.
Hi, Adam.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We're super excited to have you here. Lots of interest from our registrations, and people are joining us now. There's over 60 in the room,
Wow.
and they've been asking lots of questions about interviews and different types of interviews. So I think, as you know, so it's going to pop up these note takers. So we've obviously got a lot of questions already from people that have asked in advance. But of course, our chat is open. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're up to 70 people now. Welcome. Thank you for submitting questions before. But if there's any questions that come up during the session today, please jot them in the chat. We will try to answer as many as possible. We only have 45 minutes and we've got a lot to get through, but hopefully we can cover some of the main things. Before we start, Becky, could you give us a little background on yourself?
Absolutely.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
of course. Yeah, lovely to be here today. So my name's Becky Brown. I am a program manager at Sova Assessment, and I'm fairly new in the role. I've been at Sova now for just over a month.
Wow.
But prior to that, and for those of you that don't know, which many of you probably won't, Sova Assessment are an assessment provider that employers would use to help assess their candidates. So whether that's psychometrics or assessment center platforms or video interview platforms. So they provide the software and also they design the assessments as well. But prior to joining Sova, I was at Group GTI and led on the ATS. So again, it's probably a bit of software that lots of people on the call will use, but may not know what it is. Basically, the ATS is the mechanism that candidates would use to apply for a role. So it's where they will submit their CV and fill out an application form. And it's generally how the recruiters will manage the applications as they go through. So keeping track of where everybody else is in the process. Um, but I've spent the majority of my time and my career working in early careers as a recruiter myself. So for 11 years, I worked at an investment bank and I led on the investment banking recruitment for graduates and interns and industrial placements. And it was a very small team, so I managed everything. So from designing the attraction and the assessments to then moving the candidates through the process, but then also designing and delivering their training programs when they came into the business as well. So I would get to know all of my candidates very well and kind of see them through the full life cycle of their recruitment process, which was really lovely. But it meant that being in investment banking, I dealt with thousands and thousands of applications every year for when we
Wow.
were hiring a relatively small number of people. So all of these mechanisms that recruiters will use to help review their candidates, manage their candidates, and actually find the good candidates, I've been very familiar with them and just, how recruiters manage the volume, which was always a challenge for me.
Amazing. I think you are going to have lots of valuable insights for everybody today. Amazing experience. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think we get straight into it. And you were saying in your current role, the company there, one of the things is the video interviews. And this is something that quite a lot of people were asking about beforehand, were submitting questions around how can you perform your best at a video interview, what kind of questions are going to come up. People mention higher views. Yeah, what can
Yeah.
you tell us about video interviews?
So I think when people refer to higher view, they are essentially referring to pre-recorded video interviews.
Okay.
Um, I think it's a common platform. I think they got into the market fairly early on, so a lot of students are very familiar with it. But the reality is there are lots of different assessment platforms out there. So Sova, but also Willow or Capfinity or SHL. So I think
Mm,
even if candidates are used to a particular platform, they should be wary that it's not necessarily going to be on the same software. So if they've done one of these interviews before, they should still go through the motions of checking their technology works and making sure that they're familiar with the platform and how it works. Most of the providers, in fact, I'd say pretty much, I don't know any that don't. They will give the candidate the opportunity to go into the platform and check their technology first. So they'll be able to go in, make sure that their camera works, their audio works, all of that kind of good stuff. Different employers will have different approaches as to how they want candidates to manage those pre-recorded video interviews. So, and actually, this is kind of consistent throughout the recruitment process. Some employers will give candidates loads of information. There are some employers now who will even tell the candidates what interview questions they are going to be asked before they go into the interview. And that's not necessarily just for a pre-recorded video interview. It could even be for an in-person interview. But then there are some employers where they won't be sharing that information at all. So I think general guidance that I could give is for whichever interview you've been invited to attend, try and get as much information as you can. So employers will typically give lots of guidance in maybe the invitation email. So they might say, you know, what the interview is looking to assess. So some of them might have a technological focus. Some of them might be more focused on around your fit and your motivation. Some of them will want to have a bit more understanding about what the candidate's experience is and how that lends itself to the role. There isn't any kind of this is what it's going to be answer. It is very much dependent on the employer. And therefore the amount of support and guidance that the candidate will have will also be very dependent on the employer. But in terms of general guidance, yeah, making sure that you check the technology, that you have a nice quiet space to be able to do the interview as well. So I imagine that lots of the students on the call will be in shared housing, or they might still be living with their family. Do as much as you can to say, you know, hey, by the way, I'm going to be doing this interview, don't disturb me. But I can tell you this, that every single recruiter who will be reviewing those video interviews will have definitely seen an interruption of some sort. You know, there's the mum that comes in the door asking if they want a cup of tea. And, you know, you see them getting really flustered, but it's normal. And so don't worry about that stuff. Don't overthink it. Just kind of bounce back as if you're in a real life interview and you get interrupted and then you're like, right, now where was I? And then you kind of just try and get back on track as best as you can. But I mean, the interviews, I would say 99% of the time will be reviewed by a real person. So the candidate in front of the camera, as much as it's a bit weird. I mean, look, I'm talking to you via a camera now. We're not exactly sat across the table. You could just, not to put you down, Adam, but you could just be a recording, say, and I would be talking to you in exactly the same way. You want to try and speak to the camera as if you're speaking to a person, because a person is still going to be reviewing the answers, even though they've been recorded. And what the interviewers are going to be looking for, it's going to be about the motivation of the person, the knowledge of that person. You know, are they communicating effectively? Are they engaging? You know, different roles will have different focuses. So, like I say, some will be very, very technical, and that may be the thing that you need to get across rather than your interpersonal skills. But where there is a role where interpersonal skills are critical, say you're going to be client facing, or, you know, it's going to be really teamwork focused, then those are the things that the recruiter is going to be looking for. So I'll kind of go back to my original point, is get as much information as you can, see what information you can glean from what the employer has said in terms of how to prepare. You know, the job role description is going to be a good starting point as well, because then you'll get a sense as to, you know, what's the real focus of this job spec? Is it about my technical ability? Is it about my project skills? Is it about my communication skills? And that will then help give the students a bit of a focus as to what they might want to really kind of highlight when they are
Right.
doing those interviews.
So there's two, based on, thank you. It's really, really useful. And there's two things that have popped into my mind, and again, have come up in some of the questions. But the first one is about how important is it how well you're presented? And I say this because just 2 weeks ago, I was doing some online coaching, interview coaching, and the guy was going for video interviews, and he was giving fantastic answers. Um, but he never once looked at the camera. And I asked him, I was like, are you reading the notes? Are you reading answers? And he's like, absolutely not. It's like, but to me, it looks like you are. So I think it's really important that you look at the camera. Otherwise, it looks like you're reading notes. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you don't necessarily need to be looking directly down the lens of the camera or exactly where the little dot is, but I've definitely seen candidates where they have prepared an answer. And I think actually that's kind of one of the risks of having a pre-recorded video
Mm-hmm.
interview that, and again, depending on the software, depending on the employer preference, some candidates will have the opportunity to, they'll be given a fixed time, maybe how much how much thinking time they've got before they have to then record their answer. Some of them will have almost an unlimited amount and they can just click start and record as and when they want to. The danger with that is that then it gives the candidate the opportunity to overthink and over prepare. And what you don't want is to have somebody who's just reading off a script, because then you're not getting the sense of the true person. The answers might be fantastic in terms of their content, but if they're sounding quite stilted and if they are just reading, firstly, you don't get a sense for who that person is. But also, you don't really get a sense as to whether that answer is genuine or not, and
Mm-hmm.
whether it's just, has that answer come from somebody else? I've seen interviews where there's literally been somebody speaking here and literally a friend behind the camera, and they've been kind of trying to give them prompts. So again, top tip, don't try any of that stuff, because we as recruiters can spot it a mile away. And you basically want to assess the person that you're trying
Yes.
to assess. Um, the other thing is you also don't want to be putting something into ChatGPT to get a formulaic answer, because it is definitely something that recruiters have seen um, a lot over the last couple of years, where you get pretty much identical answers, and whether that's in a written response, so maybe on an application form, you might be asked to write a cover letter, or say why you're interested in the job, you know, and the responses, you see them all and they're all the same. And you should also be aware that the recruiter is probably reviewing your interview at the same time as lots of others. So I think so candidates will often see pre-recorded video interviews as a negative thing. They're like, "Oh, I don't want to do a pre-recorded video interview. I want to just have an interview with somebody, because that's much more natural. That's much easier to do. I'd feel much more comfortable with that." There are some employers that they might even give you the option of doing that. There was an employer that we were working with at GTI who did precisely that, where a candidate could have the option of either doing a video interview or scheduling a telephone interview. But that's quite rare and it relies on a lot of resource. And that's predominantly the reason why there are pre-recorded video interviews. It's to help the recruiters manage the volume and actually see as many candidates as they can. And I would urge students not to think of it as a negative thing. It is essentially a first opportunity for somebody to get themselves in front of the employer, to showcase themselves, showcase their interest. And even though they're not necessarily seeing the recruiter themselves, be reassured that the recruiter will be seeing them and will be assessing them. So, and the reason why they do that is because then, rather than having to schedule, X number of 30-minute interviews back to back, you can just say, right, I'm going to block out these 2 hours and I'm just going to motor through, and you will just do back to back to back to back. There is no waiting between them. You don't have to do it sounds awful, but you don't have to do the niceties. You don't have to waste those 5 minutes of, thank you very much, nice to meet you, this is me, blah, blah, blah. You just get straight on with it. And when you're dealing with thousands of candidates, those time savings are really important. And fundamentally, back to when I think, pre-video interview days, because I've been recruiting for quite a while, pre-video interview days, you couldn't see as many candidates. You just
Sure.
couldn't. So the opportunity for somebody to actually have that time in front of the employer was a lot rarer. So as much as candidates will see it as being quite a negative thing, they don't really like it, think of it as being a positive. This is their chance to stand out and to say to the employer, this is me, this is why I'm really interested. And that's why you don't want to water it down with having things like a GPT identikit answer or reading from a script, because you're focusing on the words and the content. And forgive me if some people know this statistic already, but the amount that people actually take in by the actual words that you say is only 7%. Everything else, so the type of words you say and what you say only accounts for 7% of what message is received. Your tone of voice accounts for 38%, and your body language, your non-verbal, accounts for 55%. So students shouldn't get hung up on making sure that they say exactly the right thing in exactly the right way. It's about conveying your interest, your
Yeah.
motivation, your skills, and
And
all
I
of that
think
good
that's
stuff.
particularly relevant to the majority of students who are joining us today, who are international students. And I would say that most don't have English as their first language. The fact that they're studying in the UK, I'm assuming that most people on here have a very high level of English, probably around the C1 level. But you've got the added pressure of an interview, the stress that it is, and if it's being recorded, there might be time pressure, and English isn't your first language. It can become really stressful. And a couple of people have asked, questions here around, how to prepare when English isn't your first language. And I think what you're saying, Becky, is look, we're not looking for a flawless answer because it's the whole thing, right? So the answer might not be perfect, but if it's showing your personality and you're on the right theme, maybe, if you're not speaking English in your first language, your grammar's not perfect, you get a few words mixed up. It's not the end of the world. Don't focus
No.
on that. Focus on conveying the message, but conveying your personality as well.
Yeah, people want authenticity, and you can
Yeah.
really tell whether it's whether it's a conversation like this over Teams or whether it's in person or as a pre-recorded interview. You can tell whether somebody is being authentic and genuine. Um, you'll at some point, I would guarantee that a candidate is going to be asked about their motivation for the role. Why are they interested in it? And me having worked in an investment bank, there were candidates that would generally fit into kind of two pools. There would be those where that was kind of their moment to show that they'd done their research, that they'd read stuff on the website, that they could tell you when the company was founded, and they could tell you about a press release about a recent transaction that the bank had been working on. And that was great. They'd shown that they'd done their research, but it didn't really tell me why they were actually really interested in being an investment banker. The second group of candidates would be able to say, well, look, I read about this thing in the newspaper and I thought that was really interesting. And it ties in with my interest in this that I used to do at school, or something that, that gets across the real motivation. And that's the one where you can really sense that somebody's genuinely interested, rather than going through the motions and, well, I kind of want to do this job because I've been told it's a good job to have, and it'll be a good career. You can spot the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't get hung up on the English language piece. I mean, I think students and candidates need to be honest with themselves. If a job description says that you need to have fluent English, or even, if you're applying for another country and there is a language fluency level that is required for that geography, you need to be honest about whether be honest with yourself about whether you feel like you've got that fluency. And I think whether if if an employer is going to be sponsoring visas or something like that, then they know that they are going to be getting international students. So they will be prepared and know that they will be having lots of people where they come where they don't have English as their first language. And it will be something that it won't be a markdown. It'll be around, do you convey your thoughts? Do they understand what you're trying to say? Do you are you, and by that I don't mean, can they physically understand what you're saying, but are you actually able to get your point across?
Yeah.
Are you able to still be engaging and get your personality across, or talk about like I say, if it is a really technical role, are you able to talk about that technical concept with the terminology that they might require for that role? That's the stuff that they're going to be looking at. But everybody stumbles on their words, even when they're speaking in their native language. And some of the questions that we were asked kind of ahead of the start of this session, some of those pre-submitted questions, it was around, how do you prepare for questions where you get a curveball, or you don't know what kind of questions that you're going to get, or if you get a technical question and you don't know the answer. And I'd say for all of those, take the time to just think. And I would say, particularly when you've got an in-person interview, it's much easier to then be able to say to somebody, do you mind if I just take a moment and have a think? No one is going to mind that, because every interviewer is going to prefer somebody to then take a minute, gather their thoughts, and then speak, rather than just launch straight into an answer where they're not really answering the question, and you can tell they feel a bit uncomfortable and they're not really sure what to say. And it does take a little bit of confidence to say, do you mind if I just take a minute to think about that? But don't be afraid to do it, because it will help you kind of center yourself and think about, right, what do I want to say? And if it's a technical question, particularly, if you don't know the answer, there will be some questions where you don't know the answer. Don't fudge it. Say, I'm not sure, but I might do XYZ. Like, this is how I would go about finding out, because the reality is, in everybody's job, no matter what they do, no matter what industry they're working in, no matter what role they're in, every day they will come across problems where they don't know the answer. And it's about, how do you apply yourself to that situation? How do you then take the thing that you don't know what to do and go, right, how am I going to figure this out? Like, how am I going to solve this problem?
And I think
And so
also,
it's just kind of showing your way of working, and that you're
yeah,
thinking about things logically.
and don't be afraid to go and to check back, whether it's either technical, or it's when we go back to the English language, just rephrase the question back to the interviewer. So, can I check, are you asking me this? And they'll go, yes. And you go,
Yeah,
okay. Or they say, no, and they will rephrase the question for you. So there's nothing wrong by saying, oh, can I just check that this is what you're asking, or this is what you mean?
yeah.
And that's for whether it's the English, whether it's the technical. There's times that I've been in interviews, I'm like, I'm not quite sure what you mean here. And there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with admitting that.
And I got to be honest, there are some interviewers out there where they do ask questions in a very confusing way.
Mm.
So they might have multiple layers of, like, they have multiple parts to a
Yes,
question. And
yes.
so it's very easy for you, as then the person listening to that question, to think, okay, well, I maybe got the first bit, but I wasn't sure about the second bit or the third bit. And it's like you say, it is absolutely no problem to say, okay, so can I just recap, what you asked? So you wanted to do this or this, or you even find yourself getting midway through the answer, and then you go, ooh, now there was another part to that question and I can't quite remember it. Um, and just be honest and say, because actually it says more to it says more to the interviewer to go, okay, so they remembered that there was a third part to that question, but they just needed it repeating, rather than just stopping after the second part and then doing nothing, because then that kind of shows that actually maybe they didn't remember that there was another part to the question,
Mhm.
and they think they fully answered it, but they actually haven't. So, but when it's a pre-recorded video interview, those things generally aren't a problem because you
Mhm.
have those answers. Either they'll either be like a person who will be it'll be a recording of somebody asking you the question, and then you can probably replay it, and you, like I say, you've got that time to think about it, or it might just be some text on the screen, or it can even be both. So that employers are going to be really keen that they are accessible to everybody. So they will want to have that flexibility for candidates. So if they prefer to receive information verbally rather than written down, or vice versa, that they have that opportunity to have the question in that format. Because ultimately, recruiters want people to perform to their best ability. You want to give them the support and the guidance to help them do well so that they do feel confident and relaxed. Um, but we all know that people are nervous. So if you
Sure.
come out of an interview thinking, oh God, that was terrible. I know I was so nervous and I stumbled across my words. Don't worry about it because pretty much everybody else will be as well. And some
Yeah.
people can mask it better than others, but it will be something that recruiters will definitely take into consideration when they're going to then be watching you back.
Mhm. Thank you. So I think we've touched on some of the points that cross all kinds of interviews, but can we move specifically into an in-person, whether that is, and then there's different in-person interviews, right? So it could be in an assessment center, it could be group interviews, which I don't know, in my head, that's something like the Hunger Games or Traitors, I don't know, or an assessment center, you think, is this a competition here? How to handle your nerves, and are there different ways to handle these types of interviews?
Yeah, so at an assessment centre, um, there are different kind of exercises that candidates could be given. Um, but typically you might get a group exercise, you might get an individual presentation exercise, and you might also have, an interview as part of the assessment centre. And I would say if you do have an interview as part of the assessment centre, you should prepare for it in just the same way as if you have an interview on another day. You they best practice would be to give the candidate guidance as to what to expect. So are you going to be asked around certain competencies? And so by that, I mean things like your knowledge or your critical thinking or, your team
Communication,
working skills,
teamwork,
exactly
yeah.
that kind of stuff. So, I mean, again, recruiters will essentially be an and assessors because by the time you get to an assessment center, more often than not, it's not necessarily a recruiter who's doing the assessing. It might be somebody within the business. Um, but either way, they will be assessing candidates across a matrix, like a score sheet. And it's so that there is consistency and so that you don't have the bias, that you have a nice, measured, um, kind of solid structure to how you're reviewing and assessing candidates. And good practices is that will happen all the way through the recruitment process. But I mean, for a group exercise, I would say that it's not really an interview. You would have assessors viewing, but what that's going to be there, and I think it does tie in with one of the questions that we had, which is, how do you kind of like interject when it's that group scenario? I would say it's not really an interview, but it is a way for the assessors to see how people work with each other and how they actually assess the information that's being given to them. So, are they picking out the salient points? Are they being respectful to other people in the group? Are they listening to what's being said? Um, are they being mindful about what the task is that they've been given? So, are they keeping to time? And by that, I don't necessarily mean that everybody needs to be like, "Oh, I'll be timekeeper," because that happens with pretty much every group exercise. Just like, I'll be timekeeper. But if you do take on that role, be sure that you do keep to the time because the amount of times they'll be like, I'll be timekeeper. And then it's like, oh gosh, we've only got 2 minutes left. Like they haven't actually done a very good job of keeping
That
the
would
time.
be me.
But I think some people do that because then they're like, oh, at least I've got a role and I can now relax a bit because then that will give me an opportunity to speak. Whereas it still doesn't really give the assessors what they're going to be reviewing you on. So it still doesn't say, are you talking about the materials? Are you showing your knowledge? Are you showing your critical thinking? Are you showing that you are respectful of others in the group? That kind of thing. But I mean, in terms of like interjecting and making your voice heard, it's about how to do it respectfully. So you don't necessarily want to be talking over people. You want to make sure that there's a break in the conversation. And there are times when it will be challenging because you might be in a group with somebody who's really dominant. And that's about, again, how do you then kind of make sure that you do get the opportunity to speak without being rude? And so it's that kind of judgment. When it comes to, say, a presentation exercise, that will typically be one-to-one, but you might do it with a group of other candidates. And then again, it's about showing how you would then present to somebody. You kind of divide up what you're going to talk about and you make sure that you still speak clearly and with impact and all of that good stuff. And then there may well be a Q&A section after that. There might even be a Q&A section after a group exercise as well. But it's about, same as any interview, listening to the question, making sure that you understand what the answer is. If you don't know the answer, don't fudge it. Just say, I'm not sure, but this, I think honesty goes a long way with interviews. So if you don't know the answer, say that you don't know the answer, but have a stab at it. Because most people who are then hearing that answer are gonna be respectful of the fact that you gave it a go and that you tried, rather than just trying to waffle on, because you don't want to waste your time with a load of waffle that then doesn't mean anything. It's better to say, I'm not sure, but this. Because you might be sat across the table from somebody who not only wrote that question but knows the answer inside out. It might be on an area of their business, it might be on something that they designed, that they worked on, that they know it inside out. So like I say, don't try and fob them off, but take your best stab at it. But with those one-to-one interviews, I mean, you could be asked all sorts of things, but that's where you can take that time to take a breath, think about what you want to say. If things are specifically about the task that you've just done, then you've already got that frame of reference. So you can refer back to the materials. Sometimes you'll even still have the materials that you could then look back on and just remind yourself of a statistic or something like that. Or you might still have the presentation in front of you that you've just delivered. But if you don't have any of that and you're just talking about yourself, think about how you can show the breadth of your knowledge and your understanding and your experiences. So, and this actually goes for all of the interviews. If you are asked to talk about certain things, try not to take your examples from the same few experiences. So if, say, you have had some work experience in the role for which you're applying, don't feel like you need to have all of those answers from that work experience that you've had. You can talk about other things. And I think it certainly lends itself to students from an international background. Think about those transferable skills. Yes, you may not have been quite so familiar with things in the country for which you're applying, or you maybe haven't done an internship at that company before because maybe you weren't in the country then, but you might have done other things. So it's about thinking about, what have you done? How can that be relatable? Okay, so I haven't worked in a bank before, but I did work in a shop for years and I've done lots of things dealing with difficult customers and dealing with time pressures and things like that. How can you then leverage those experiences into a professional environment? You know, even if you're talking about your extracurricular activities, don't be afraid to use those too, because then they can be a really good demonstration of determination and motivation and passion and, you know, balancing your time and your commitments and things like that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in, and there's a couple that have popped into my mind as we've gone through. So this last one, Jack. Hi, Jack. Let's. It's a niche question. I don't think it's too niche. If we make it to the assessment centre, in terms of clothing, what do we need to be aware of, and even the bag we bring? Well, if you've been invited to an assessment centre, you've got a contact, right? Just quite simply ask the person who sent the invite what the dress code is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because some will, and actually, I can't. It's kind of the same even for a pre-recorded video interview. Some people will be dressed up as if they are going to an in-person interview at an office where they'll be in a full suit, and that's fine. That's great. But if you don't need to be, don't. And if you're not sure, ask. Um, you will have a contact at the company because you will have been given an invite. So yeah, definitely check to see if there's a dress code. They may well have already provided that information to you. So there might be a frequently asked questions section, or they might have just put it in the invite, you know, how best to prepare, what to bring, that kind of thing. But yeah, if you don't know, ask. There may well be like some companies will have facilities whereby you can ask people at the company things. So um, there are some platforms where they're like chat platforms where you can speak to somebody within the business, and you might be able to ask there. There might be some people at your university that have also gone for exactly the same experience. You know, if you're studying something that is quite specific, like a particular type of engineering, and you're going for a role that has that particular type of engineering role, odds are there are people in your network that probably would have had that experience already. But yeah, don't be afraid to ask. There will probably be information up on the company website. There might even be an early careers site where you can get information from as well, that kind of thing.
I say don't be afraid of asking the person, right, who's done it.
Yeah,
Just quite simply, what is the dress code? In terms of bag, I'm assuming that you mean whether or not we need something very formal or a
briefcase.
rucksack.
Yeah.
Like, rucksack's fine, right? And quite often it'll be maybe left in another room somewhere. I'd say probably don't walk in with like the plastic bag from the convenience store on the corner. But you know, if that's all you have, that's all you have. I wouldn't stress about that. Wouldn't stress about that,
Yeah,
Jack.
I'd say,
Karen,
you know, go with what you think, go with
yeah,
what makes you comfortable. You know, you don't necessarily want to be going in with a briefcase if you feel really uncomfortable with a briefcase and you think, oh, I wish I'd, you know, you don't necessarily want to stand out as, you know, being the person that brought the
yeah,
briefcase and
well, the
everybody else
briefcase.
is there with a rucksack. So, you know, just go with what you find comfortable, but also you probably will get an idea from the company website what kind of vibe it's got, because most company websites will have pictures of their employees. So you'll get a sense if people are there in like jeans and t-shirt or if they're always in a suit, you know.
Yeah, super. Caroline has an interview coming up in a hybrid format. Congratulations, Caroline. That's
Well
very
done.
exciting. Yeah. So the international partner will be online and the others will be in person. How best to engage with those in the room and those online?
Yeah, it's
I mean, that's my
hard.
worst fear as a panel interview.
But I mean, to be honest, you have that in like workplace meetings as well.
Mhm.
And I've been in meetings with clients where you've had a mix, and it is difficult. There is the there is the tendency, if you are in the room with other people in the room, that the person who's just on the phone gets ignored a bit. So if you are in the room with, like, so basically, if you're in person with the people in the room, make sure that you still address the person who's on camera. So you're still looking to them when you're answering the questions. Um, if they're very passive and they don't really ask a question, then you know that's one thing. If they are asking a question to you directly, it's very easy to then look at the camera and then speak to them. But even if that's the case, you'd still want to then talk to the other people that are in the room as well. So any kind of panel interview situation, whether you've got that hybrid situation or even if everybody's in the same place, when you are answering a question, you still want to look at everybody as you're doing so. So don't just direct your answer to the person who asked you the question.
Great, thank you. Now we are coming to the end of the session. That time has gone so quickly, like
Wow.
interviews do, right? So we're coming to the end. So I think it seems fitting to talk about the end of an interview. I, like you, have done hundreds of interviews, and at the end, I always say, "Do you have any questions?" And people are usually say, no, no, I don't, or I can't think of anything. It's not the best way to finish an interview, right?
It's not.
You want them to ask you some questions. I have my own take on what I think people should ask, but for you, who's asked that question many times, what are the best questions that you get asked? What makes you
Yeah.
remember the candidate?
I mean, it's those where they show that they're really keen and interested,
Yeah,
and that it's not just like it's a genuine question. It's not just a formulaic question like, you know, what's it like to work here or something like that. I mean, you can put it in a different way and it seems more interesting. But if you just think, oh, this is one that's kind of come off a pre-prepared list of questions to ask at the end of an interview. Um, but definitely always have something to ask. I think it can be difficult if you are going for, like I used to run interviews where a candidate would have three back-to-back interviews with three different interviewers. So it was kind of like a panel, but they were one-to-one. So by the time they got to the third interview with the third room, and they were like, I don't really have any questions because I asked the last two people. Make sure you still have a question to ask, even if it's asking the same question, because then you're getting somebody else's take and you're still able to show to that person that you've got some interest rather
yeah.
than just going, well, actually, I've kind of run out. I don't
I mean,
don't really want to know anything else anymore.
for me, when I'm doing interview coaching, I always recommend ask about the interviewer, because that way, even if you have five interviewers, you can keep asking the same question, but the answer will be different. So for me to say something like, what have since you joined the company, what skills have you developed? What is it about the company culture that you most like here? So then it's a very simple question. You can ask every person that you meet that same question. You've always got a question. And people like to talk about themselves, right? So you ask them about them. They're not going to get stuck on the answer. So I think it's quite, for
Yeah,
me, I recommend people ask that at the end.
I think sometimes candidates can feel pressure to ask something that seems really smart and challenging.
Yes.
And it can then actually be really difficult for the interviewer to answer.
Mhm.
So I think one time I was asked about the company's CSR policies, and I was like, well, I don't. It, it's not my business area. Like I don't
Yeah.
know any more than anybody else really. Like it's not my area of expertise. So it was quite a difficult thing for me to ask. So yeah, asking something about that person's experience, kind of how the company's changed since they've been there, or
Mhm.
some of the most memorable things that they've worked on, or what they like most about the company, or how would they describe the company culture. Like they're all really open questions where you can then get an insight into the company. Because
Yeah.
do you know what? I'm going to finish on this point because I think it's really, really important when you have a interview with an employer, particularly when you have the opportunity to be in front of somebody. So this wouldn't be one-way interviews, but with all of the others where you're in front of somebody else, yes, they are interviewing you, but you are also interviewing them. It is your opportunity to find out about the company, about the job, and if the place is right for you. It's not just a one-way street. So ask those questions to find out whether it's got the right company culture, whether you could see yourself working there, because so many jobs will look fundamentally the same on a piece of paper. And it's about what makes one company different from another, what makes one job different from another when you look at it and it looks kind of the same.
Mhm.
So yeah, ask your questions, find out what you want to know, what's important to you.
Yeah, great. I think we're going to have another session, Becky, because people are just starting to fire questions over. I'm going to address one very, very quickly, which is Fidelis, which is the question about why are you applying for this job? But as I said, for me, applying for a job is about earning a living and about job satisfaction. Of course, you don't say it's for the money. Why do you want this job? Again, this comes back to what Becky was saying earlier on. What is your motivation? So talk about the company, what it is about that company. Like, don't say it's just for the money, but why are you applying for this job? Uh,
Yeah, it's like, what is it about that job that makes you attracted to it? So
yeah.
is it because, you're really good at something that then
Mhm.
that's something that's needed for the job? So then you could say, well, I think I'm actually a good fit for this role because this is one of my strengths and, these are one of the things that I enjoy. It's really important. Like I'm a, I work to live, not live to work. But I think
Mhm.
it's really important that you still find something that you enjoy. It doesn't
Yes.
need to be your mission or the thing that, is
Yeah.
the thing that gets you up in the morning. But fundamentally, you're going to spend a long time doing it. So if you hate it, it's not it's not going to
Yes.
work out.
Yes.
So yes, a job could look brilliant on paper. Like it pays a lot of money, it's going to have prestige. But if you don't like it, you will hate it. And fundamentally, you also won't be very good at it.
No.
So think about just again, be honest with yourself. Think about why you want to do that job. Is it because, I don't know, somebody said, and in the role that I used to recruit for, investment banking, you would, of course, see lots of people that would go into investment banking because it was prestigious, because you would earn
Mhm.
a lot of money,
Mhm.
because maybe their parents did it, because their
Mhm.
parents told them to do it.
Yeah.
They weren't, they are not good reasons to be going into a job because it's a tough job and you need to kind of like it. You're going to be working long hours and you if you don't like it, then you're not going to do well at it. So
Yeah.
think about why you genuinely are interested. What are you
Yeah.
passionate about? What are you good at?
I had
Of all of those opportunities, why is this the one that you're thinking, yeah?
yeah.
And look,
I go on.
don't get us wrong. We know that you're going to be applying to lots of different jobs. So we're not necessarily going to go, this is, unless you want this job and only this job, then you're not for us. But you've got to say, what is it about this company that appeals? Like, is it the work they do? Is it the culture that they foster? Is it the people that you met along the way? Like, did you go to a careers fair and you met
Yeah.
somebody and you thought, "Do you know what? They're my kind of person. I could see myself working there."
Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely. So anyway, I worked in sales for years, and um, sorry, certainly I was in sales for years, and I recruited a guy, and probably for similar reasons joined us. And sales is a lot of cold calling. Certainly back in the day, before you got on the phones, you were calling, and he hated the phone. He hated even answering the phone when it rang. I was like, "What are you doing here?" But just on that, and this is my last point today, because somebody is saying, "What is your motivation? Can you be honest about financial motivation?" To a point, and it depends on the industry. I once coached somebody for a sales job. And I said, "Oh, why do you want to work for this company?" And he's like, "Oh, because I want to make a difference and I want to do this." And I was like, "Stop that right now. You want money. It's a sales job." And he was just, "What? I can go into an interview and say, yes, that's what a sales job is about." Right. Of course, there's other stuff around it. And he went in and he said, when he said that to them, their whole demeanor changed and he got the job and he still works there. And this was six
Yeah.
years ago.
But
But
I would say, arguably, with that situation, it's not just about, I want to earn lots of money. You spin it and you say, I want to help the company grow. I want
yeah,
to find new opportunities. I want to have an impact on how the company then evolves over time and things
yeah.
like that. And yes, you are motivated by winning. And yes, you are motivated by speaking to people. But I would still probably go, well, if you turn around and said, you just wanted to earn lots of money, probably not the answer that I'd want to hear. But It's that spin on it, isn't it? It's like, how do you
Yes.
say it without actually saying it?
Yes. Yeah. All right. Look, thank you. So many. We've overrun, so thank you for your time. Thank you for bearing with us while we overrun. There's more questions that have come through. To everyone that's joined us, you've got amazing career services in the universities. You know, we could have sat here all
Use
afternoon and
them.
keep answering the questions, but sadly we had to go. Utilize your career services. They do a fantastic job in all of the universities around the country. So drop in, message them. We here have been speaking to loads of the teams, and they're super open and eager to help you. So please do
Loads of
speak to your teams.
resources as well. Loads of
Yeah.
resources. So interviews, you'll be able to do practice interviews. They may have practice software for you to use as well. So yeah, CV, workshops, the lot. They'll have loads of
Yeah.
support.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for everybody who joined us today. Huge thank you to Becky. You've been fantastic. So much information. What we'll do is we'll try and pull out the key points and put those on the website along with a link to this video. If you want that video, I think Lucas put a note in here where you can sign up to get notified. So please use that form and then we will send out the link and future webinars. Thank you so much.
That's a
And to
pleasure.
everybody else, have a great rest of the week. Good luck with your
Yeah.
interviews.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you,
luck.
everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.